Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron. Now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everybody, and welcome to Stirring the Cauldron here on the Pair X Radio Network. My opening song tonight, Relic Uncovered by Midnight Syndicate, kind of sets the mood for tonight's show because you might call the debris and some other things left as the result of the Roswell crash in 1947 relics. And we'll be talking about also uncovering one of the biggest cover-ups in recent history. My guest tonight is Air Force veteran Thomas J. Carey, and Tom held a top secret crypto clearance and is now a retired Philadelphia area businessman. He's been a MUFON State Section Director for Southeastern Pennsylvania from 1986 to 2002, a special investigator for the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies from 1991 to 2001, and a member of the CUFOS Board of Directors from 1997 to 2001. He began investigating aspects of the Roswell incident in 1991 for the Roswell investigative team of Kevin Randall and Don Schmitt, and since 1998, he has teamed exclusively with Don Schmitt to continue a proactive investigation of the case. Now, Tom has authored or co-authored more than 30 published articles about the Roswell events of 1947. He's contributed to a number of books on the subject as well, appeared as a guest on many radio and TV shows throughout the country, including Coast to Coast with Art Bell and George Noory. He was a consultant and interviewee with Don Schmitt also on the highly acclaimed and rated 2002 two-hour sci-fi channel documentary, The Roswell Crash, Startling New Evidence, as well as Sci-Fi Investigates, the History Channel's Conspiracy Theory, the Travel Channel's Weird Travels, and the History Channel's The UFO Hunters. He was also featured in the 20th Century Fox Golden Anniversary re-release DVD of the 1951 sci-fi classic, The Day the Earth Stood Still. And his book with Tom Schmitt, Witness to Roswell, Unmasking the 60-Year Cover-Up, was the #1 best-selling UFO book in the world in 2007 to 2008. And the sequel, Witness to Roswell, Unmasking the Government's Biggest Cover-Up, published in 2009, remains a bestseller. Tom, welcome back to the show.
Nice to be with you, Marla.
Oh, I loved your book. It kept me riveted for a very long time, which is
thank
good.
you.
That keeps me out of mischief, so it's a good thing.
Are you talking about Witness to Roswell or the new one, Inside the Real Area?
The new one, Inside Area 51.
Inside the Real Area 51.
The real area, yes, excuse me. See, I got Okay, but it's been repeated over and over again. This is one of the first things that came to mind when I was reading the book, that the true nature of what actually crashed in New Mexico in 1947 is the greatest kept secret in the history of our nation, and that you and Donald Schmitt have been called the Woodward and Bernstein of ufology, and that the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, is sometimes referred to as the tombstone standing over one of the greatest discoveries in all of recorded history. Now, it's 66 years, if my math serves me well, since the crash, and more than ever, people, for the most part, do believe in UFOs. Many believe that we're visited by them. Many others believe that aliens are already here on this planet. And in spite of that, we've not been invaded or attacked. So why do you think the government officials are so afraid to disclose about the Roswell incident?
Well, it's mostly politics, because the factors that were present in 1947 that caused our government to cover this up rather than release it are no longer present. Most notably, the Soviet Union has disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
People are more accepting of other life in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Even the skeptics who deny that Roswell happened or that UFOs are really alien spacecraft, at least some of them, even they admit that there's other life in the universe.
Right.
But back in 1947, The World War II had just ended, and a few years before, they had this this Mercury Star Theater of the Radio, War of the Worlds presentation, the H.G. Wells story.
Right.
And there was panic on the East Coast, even though they announced throughout the presentation that it was just a play.
Mm-hmm.
The format of the show was like a news broadcast, like they were breaking. Oh, we have a breaking news flash, and so that was the format, and people believed it, and they panicked and took to the streets, some with guns and what have you. Well, those things don't obtain anymore because we've had so many documentaries and movies about space aliens, and nobody seems to be upset, and most people accept it. And so I think if there was some sort of revelation that everybody could agree on, oh my goodness, they're revealing themselves, or they land on the White House lawn or land on someone's head, I think everybody would go, well, ho hum, it just doesn't obtain. So why is it still being covered up? I think it's mostly because of inertia. Something gets going. You start something, a ball rolling down the hill, a snowball down the hill. Well, it's still rolling. You can't stop it. Mm-hmm. And government and the military, if you've got something that's always been kept secret, there's no political will to change things. Do you know what I mean? The political will is just not there, because if the president or anybody comes out tomorrow of authority, say, well, folks, those, Carey and Schmidt are right. Roswell really was a crash of a UFO back in 1947. UFOs are real. We've even met with them. It's blah, blah, blah. Somebody is going to pay a price. We don't know who, whether it starts from the president on down or they just sweep the deck. We don't know, but someone will pay a political price, and no one is willing to take that chance. And in the military, if you're an officer, if you're a colonel and you want to make general, you're not going to go up to your commanding officer and say, hey, General, can you tell me about that Roswell incident? Well, that's not going to get you a star on your shoulder. You have to go with the flow. Mm-hmm. So it's the courage is not there to change things.
Mm. Well, last time you were here, we talked about your book, Witness to Roswell, the Unmasking the 60-Year Cover-Up. And on the back cover of your new book, inside the real Area 51, it tells readers to be prepared that the real Area 51, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base's vault, is about to be opened. So what kind of new information has come to light since the other book? And curiously, what is the single piece of new information that gave you an aha moment?
Well, the reason we wrote the book was because all of the Roswell books, including our own, stop when the material is delivered to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. That's sort of the end of the book. Folks, we've charted the crash and the recovery and the delivery to Wright-Patterson. See you later. Mm-hmm. Well, we wanted to continue. Well, what happened after that? Right. We wanted to continue. And there are a number of books that over the years have mentioned Wright-Patterson in a chapter or two, but there's no book that puts it all together and is really solely about Wright-Patterson and its role in the UFO phenomenon, especially Roswell. So it's the only book that does that. And as far as the new revelations, there's a lot of them in the book. We answer the mystery of Hangar 18. When most people, or at least those who have heard about Wright-Patterson, the one question they have on their mind is there really a Hangar 18? Well, we answer that question. Mm-hmm. We have another chapter about, several chapters about J. Allen Hynek, who was the Air Force consultant, the scientific consultant to Project Blue Book, Was he a dupe, or was he misinformed, or was he complicit in the cover-up? We answer that. And we answer the question of whether there were really aliens on ice at Wright-Patterson. Just a number of things like that. We chart the history of Blue Book, Project Blue Book, and we show why it was just a public relations outfit rather than how it became a public relations outfit rather than a serious attempt by the Air Force at investigating UFOs. We cover all of that.
Well, I'm curious, how many witnesses to the crash and those who took part in the investigation afterwards are still alive today?
That's a very good question, and I'm sad to report that there aren't many left. As you know, Jesse Marcel Jr. Died 2 months ago, and I was with him just in July down in Roswell at the festival. Looked fine. He looked fine, and Jesse Jr., of course, is the son of Jesse Marcel Sr., the intelligence officer at Roswell Army Airfield back in 1947. And without Jesse Sr., there would be no Roswell incident that we know about today, because he broke silence after 30 years in 1948 and said that he had actually handled pieces of a flying saucer back in 47, and thus began the civilian investigation of the Roswell incident. Because as you know, from having read the book, Marla, the Air Force really quashed the story after 2 days back in 47. It hit the newspapers one day and it was dead the next day, at least in the press. Those who were involved, kept to themselves. They talked about it amongst their family and friends in hushed tones, but the story as a press story was dead 2 days after it broke. And it was dead for the next 30 years.
Got a really interesting question from the chat room just now. Did anybody witness the actual crash in progress?
We have had 2 stories of people who said that one fellow said he was camping on in the Capitan Mountains. This is sort of overlooking the Foster Ranch where the crash occurred, and he said that he actually saw the craft go into the clouds and explode. It was the night they were having a fierce thunder and lightning storm, and he claimed that he was out there camping in the Capitans and saw this flying saucer go into the clouds and explode, blah, 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 and then fall to Earth. Well, we never try as hard as we never could get that fellow on the record. He kept dodging us and putting us off, and finally we just gave up. And when that happens, Marla, you can pretty much file his story in the bogus wastebasket. So that's what we did. We had another story of a woman, actually, this is just a few years ago, came forward, and she lives in Roswell. She said that the night of the crash, she heard this thing flying around. She lived in Corona. She lived in Corona at the time, and she heard this thing flying around, circling her house late at night during this thunderstorm. And she then heard it go off, and then she said she heard the explosion. So she didn't actually see it, but she heard it apparently circling her house, whether it was in trouble or something, but then it flew away, and then she heard the explosion. So that's really as close as we have to someone near the crash site. There was another story. This is interesting. The day that the Roswell crash was reported in the Roswell Daily Record, this would be the afternoon of July the 8th, 1947. And the fellow's name was Dan Wilmot. He owned a hardware store in Roswell on Main Street. and they carried the first Roswell press release that they had captured a flying saucer on a ranch near Roswell. Well, a little sub story there was the story that Dan Wilmot said that he was sitting out on the evening of July the 2nd. Now, this is 6 days before the story hit the newspapers. He said he was sitting out the evening of July 2nd when he saw a flying saucer go over his house. He said he could see it spinning, and he said it headed north of Roswell. And he said he saw an explosion take place. The sky lit up, and the saucer exploded. Well, we always discounted that as having anything to do with Roswell, because we had sort of fixated on a date of either July the 4th for the crash or July the 3rd. Well, don't you know, this year, a friend of ours, David Rudiak, who lives in California, has done a lot of research on the case, and he got the old weather reports as close as he could get to the Corona region, which is where the thing allegedly blew up. Mm-hmm. And don't you know that there's a report that there was thunder and lightning the evening of July the 2nd, 1947, but not on the 3rd or 4th or 5th. So based on that, because we have a number of witnesses who said, yes, they heard the explosion during a thunder and lightning storm. Well, the only evening that there was that thunder and lightning storm was July the 2nd. And that's the same night that Dan Wilmot saw this thing go over his house and explode north of town. So right now, as we talk, we're sitting on a July 2nd, 1947 date for the crash, late, maybe just before midnight.
Hmm. And apparently, people heard it. Nobody went looking because it was kind of a empty area. I mean, it wasn't, the middle of a city or anything.
Very remote. Plus, it was near midnight and a lot of thunder and lightning going on. And I've been down there when they have they call it the monsoon season down there in July, when you have the thunder and lightning. And I don't want to be out when the lightning is going around like that, So they waited till the next day. And the next day is when the wreckage was found by the rancher, Mac Brazel.
Right. Now, the reason I want to go back just a second, because when I asked you how many people, witnesses to the crash, and what the aftermath of the crash are still alive, it would seem that much of the inside information that's coming forward comes in the form of deathbed confessions from those who either witnessed or took part in the events surrounding the crash. If these people had valid information, albeit top secret, were they afraid to speak out because of consequences or sworn secrecy or whatever? I mean, sitting on a hotbed like that, you'd think somebody would have opened their mouth by.
Well, they of course told their families. Mm-hmm. Of course, they tell their families, don't ever talk about this. Marla, what we found out in interviewing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people about this is that in the military, the ones who talked the most were the enlisted men. Mm-hmm. And the ones who talked the least were the officers. Now, there's gradations in each. For instance, if you were an enlisted man and made the Air Force, let's say, a career, at some point you became a non-commissioned officer or a sergeant. Uh-huh. So the sergeants, we found, were very reluctant to talk because they were living on an Air Force pension.
Right.
Okay. So if you were receiving an Air Force or a military or a government pension, there was great reluctance to talk about this for fear of somehow upsetting your pension. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's never happened, but in their minds, why, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So they very reluctant to talk about it. Officers are reluctant for the same reason. if they were career officers, even the ones who weren't out of the officer code. What is it? A officer and a gentleman, or something like that. They just didn't talk. Only in rare cases have we had a number of officers talk. But most of them were enlistees who did not make the Air Force a career, and the others who talked were civilians who were not government workers.
Mm-hmm. But not at the time. It was always later on.
Yes.
So it makes me wonder if they were worried about more than just a paycheck coming in. But
yes, they were worried about their lives, because the civilians were threatened with their lives. They were threatened with death. They were threatened with the death of their family, all over a balloon. Are you kidding me? We have many people who said, and oh, by the way, I was threatened to remain silent, or else they would kill me and my family. Uh-huh. So that's not very nice.
No, it isn't. But then the next obvious question is, what about you and the others who are still on the trail looking for truth? And why are you guys able to continue your search and speak out with no consequences?
Well, the story is out, Marla. It's not like we're keeping a secret anymore. The story is out thanks to myself and Don Schmidt and those who have gone before us and those who are still out there. The story is out. And so for that reason, I don't think I know that I haven't been bothered, at least that I'm aware. And every now and then I hear a click on the phone, like a couple clicks, and I'll play a little joke. I'll say, oh, by the way, whoever's listening, I'm investigating this Roswell case, but I can be bought off. Right now my price is, X millions of dollars, but it goes up tomorrow. So you get a good deal today, but they haven't taken me up on it.
Do you think perhaps the government is waiting for everybody to pass away? Everybody that's involved, everybody that is working now before they would even say anything, not say anything, but waiting for everybody to pass away, thinking perhaps that dead men tell no tales and everything can be swept under the rug finally somewhere down the line?
You are absolutely 100% correct. That is exactly what they're doing. And they're close to it, because of all those who were involved in the case, that would be discovery, recovery, storage, analysis, etc., etc. 95% of them are gone now. 95%. So what we're getting now are the secondhand stories from family members, friends, and things like that. Right. There's only a few, say 5% left, and of that 5%, a certain percentage are so old that they suffer from Parkinson's or
Alzheimer's. Yeah.
So it's even less really than the 5%. But be that as it may, we just discovered two new ones this year that were original involved in it that are still alive. So wow. So we're still after them. So when we find one that's still alive that can talk and will talk, we are just it's just like we found our first witness.
Yeah. Exactly. I've got an interesting question from the chat room. She wants to know about the Reverend who was there at Roswell to do final rites on the dead aliens. She said he was a passing bystander as well.
Yes, Reverend Hankerson. He was a Baptist minister, and he was the base chaplain. And we get the story from his daughter. And while he was alive, because he was a career chaplain, a military chaplain, and he told his family, and his wife knew, of course, his wife Annie Hankerson. He would tell his family, every base he was ever stationed at, where he was a chaplain. Except for one base. He never mentioned being at Roswell.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have the Roswell base, not the base, well, I have the base directory, but I also have the Roswell City directory for 1947. Both Reverend Hankerson and his wife are listed in the Roswell City directory as the Reverend at the base chaplain. So he was there, and his daughter said she only wished she knew that when he was still alive. She only found out after he had passed away. Mm-hmm. And in his papers, she went through his papers, and she says, "Oh my goodness, look at him! He was at Roswell," and she had heard about Roswell. She knew about it, but never thought her father was ever involved in it because he never mentioned that he was ever there. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that on his deathbed, he was saying some very curious things which she didn't understand. Things like, "In my father's house, there are many mansions," sort of maybe alluding to other civilizations in the universe, Mm-hmm. What else did she say? Well, I can't recall, but he said a number of things which was puzzled her.
Mm-hmm. Cryptically.
But in the context of Roswell, it made sense.
Uh-huh.
Now, what we were able to find out was that right in the middle of the Roswell recovery, he was relieved of his command. He was relieved of his command, and they brought in a Catholic chaplain. Now, whether that means that he absolutely lost it, and he couldn't deal with it and lost it, because they sent him out to the Pacific somewhere rather quickly, mm-hmm. or they needed a chaplain to come in. A Catholic priest to come in who could take confession, and keep it secret.
Good point. Yeah.
So they brought in a Catholic chaplain to take the place of Reverend Hankerson on July the 10th. This is like 2 days after the first headline, and the base is still abuzz. The enlisted men and everybody, the place is just in disorder because of what was going on. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if Reverend Hankerson actually just lost control of himself, and just said, I can't deal with this. Or they wanted someone, a priest to come in who could take confession, who could take issue, last rites, perhaps, to the deceased.
Right.
But that's what they did. And we just missed both of them because we found out about the Reverend when his daughter called one of us, and he had just been buried, and we just missed the priest by 2 years.
Wow.
So what I did is I called the there's a school, I don't know if it's in Maryland or Virginia, that trains ministers to be military, to service the military. And when I called them and asked them about Hankerson, they knew right away why I was calling. And the guy says, "Let me check that out. I get back." He never got back to me.
Yeah.
So they already knew.
Mm-hmm. Well, in speaking about last rites over aliens in the crash, there are so many photos of supposed alien corpses and crash wreckage all over the internet. Do you think that even one of the thousands of photos out there, many are Photoshop masterpieces, is actually real?
Oh, the ones that are on the internet right now?
Mm-hmm.
The ones that are on there now, I'm aware of most of them. They run from everything from E.T., from the movie E.T., remember that one?
Sure.
They run the gamut. I have yet to see any on the internet that are real.
Okay. Yeah, they all kind of look alike, and they're really...
Don't ask me how I know that, but there are. I don't see any that are real.
Okay. there was a follow-up to the question about the Reverend. She'd like to know, did the Catholic priest ever write of Roswell? But you kind of sort of answered that by saying that he probably took an oath of silence, right?
Right. He
Yeah.
was a Catholic priest, and what he heard was sacrosanct, so he was not in a position to divulge that.
Right.
So, but we missed him by actually less than 2 years. But now that you mention it, I'm guessing, what would he have talked to us? I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah, exactly. So, who were some of the doctors that performed the autopsies on the supposed? I'm saying supposed because everybody says that. Whatever became of the doctors? Did any of them
The doctors? Yeah. Well, no. One of them did, and I'm sure he's sorry about it, because now he denies it, but we know he did. They tried an abortive autopsy at Roswell, but the smell was so bad they had to stop it and put the cadavers back in the sealed bags, body bags.
Mm-hmm.
The autopsies were carried out at Wright-Patterson in the Aero Medical Facility.
Mm-hmm.
And we know about that because of a fellow named Leonard Stringfield, who he was a Cincinnati businessman, but he had a lot of friends in Dayton, Ohio, where Wright-Patterson is. And some of his friends were medical people who told him about the autopsies that were conducted there on the Roswell bodies. Mm-hmm. And so what Leonard Stringfield did is he started making sketches of what he thought the bodies looked like based on the descriptions that were given to him by the medical people. And he would send it to, one of his medical friends in the mail. Is this close? And then the medical person would write back, well, this is right, but that's not right, and so forth. And finally, after several tries, he apparently got it right, because he submitted one drawing, and they finally wrote back, "You got it. This is it." And and that sketch is in the book, by the way. It's actually in both books, Witness to Roswell and Inside the Real Area 51. Mm-hmm. So we thank Leonard Stringfield for that. And what else am I thinking here? I just lost a thought. We had descriptions from eyewitnesses that are very close to Leonard Stringfield has drawn there. So we have a pretty good idea of what they look like. But your question, no, I have not seen any at least the ones that I've seen on the internet or in books or anything that are real.
Okay. Now, another rumor that gets tossed about quite a bit was the fact that, in addition to perhaps corpses of alien beings and pieces of wreckages of the craft, that maybe live beings were or maybe still are being held. That, those that didn't die in the crash. Yes.
I don't know about, if they're more recent crashes, whether they've recovered any live ones. But as far as Roswell is concerned, there was one that was reported by a number of eyewitnesses to be alive and walking around. We have perhaps a half a dozen witnesses firsthand that saw one walking around. A fellow at the crash site saw one walking around, and one fellow who was on the Roswell base, he was actually doing some painting there at the base hospital. He saw it actually walk into the emergency room under its own power.
Wow.
And we have others who have seen it at Wright-Patterson after, say the next year. So we know for a fact it was taken to Wright-Patterson. The question then becomes, well, how long did it live? And the only story we really get is that it lived until 1952 or thereabouts, when it expired, and it's some sort of experiment that they were conducting with it. So
nice.
Yeah, it lived for about 5 years. Yeah.
Here, you're an alien. Let us poke and probe you and kill you in the process. Yeah, that was
Right.
clever.
That's what we heard, yes.
Okay. Well, I just have to ask, what is the jawbone that spoke Martian?
That's a good, the jawbone that spoke Martian. That's interesting because I just had my teeth cleaned yesterday and my jawbone is still sore. But the jawbone that spoke Martian, we insisted on that chapter title. Our publisher wanted to change it to something sort of nondescript, but we insisted that you title that chapter "The Jawbone That Spoke Martian."
It's an eye catcher.
Yes, because it involves a story involving a dental technician in a veterans hospital in Dayton, Ohio, who used to work at Wright-Patterson. He retired there and went to work at a local VA hospital in Dayton when one day in the 1970s, his boss comes in and he says, "Here, I want you to make a plaster cast of this." And it was a jawbone. And it didn't look like any jawbone he had ever seen. You know, the human jawbone, mandible, the lower jaw, is sort of parabolic. It's like a parabola if you look at it, excuse me, from the top down. That's a nice dental arch, as they call it.
Right.
Well, this one was more V-shaped. And the more he looked at it, the stranger it looked. He said he's looking at this, trying to clean it up for to make the mold and then to pour the mold. He said, "Well, there were not only no teeth on it, there weren't any teeth, but there weren't any places where teeth would go. You know, like if you pull a tooth, you know, you have a socket there. You know." Well, this didn't have any sockets or any indication on the jaw that there ever were any teeth. Well, you know, the descriptions by the medical people who did the autopsies described the mouth as being a cavity that didn't go anywhere. It's not like our mouth that leads to the digestive system. Well, the mouth on the Roswell bodies didn't go anywhere. It was just a cavity. And there were no teeth in the jaw, in the mouth. There were no teeth. So this would track with that. Now, so the dental tech, he makes the mold, he pours the plaster Paris, and the next day his boss comes in there. "Have you finished that mold yet?" He said, "Yeah, here it is." He says, "Oh, good job, good job." So he takes the template. And he crushes it in his hand and throws it in the wastebasket. And out he goes. Well, the dental tech, whose name is Musgrove, still alive, he watches out the window where his boss goes. And the boss goes outside, and he's met by two Air Force officers, one of whom he recognizes as being from Wright-Patterson. And so what he guessed was that these two officers had, on their own, brought this jaw over for some reason, maybe for their own, for their own use, to get a mold of it. And after the mold was made, the plaster cast, they took it back and put the real deal back in storage where they got it. Well, seeing this, the dental tech says, "Geez, I wonder what the deal is here," because I've heard about these rumors about aliens being there because I worked there. So he went back to the wastebasket, put the template back together again like it should have been. He glued it all back together again, and he poured his own plaster cast, and somehow along the line here, he was friends with a local TV features reporter in Dayton named Carl Day. I take that back. he put the plaster cast in a bank security vault, those little security boxes, for 30 years.
Huh.
He put it in his bank security box for 30 years. And then he became friends with this Carl Day, who was a local TV reporter. So he gave it to Carl Day, and Carl Day suspected immediately what it was, the jawbone of one of the Roswell bodies. Mm-hmm. Carl Day thereupon gave a talk at Wright-Patterson to an audience that featured a lot of Air Force officers, and he put a schematic up on the screen, similar to the one that Len Stringfield has in the book. Mm-hmm. And he held the jawbone up to the schematic, and it fit perfectly. And the officers did not like that at all. And when that talk was over, they let him know that they did not appreciate him talking about these bodies and the jawbone. So Carl Day featured it on one of his TV exposés, they have this, every station has their reporter team, and this mm-hmm. was, and he featured it. And so along comes Don Schmidt and Tom Carey, and we decide, hey, let's do a book, because Carl, you've got a lot of stories about Wright-Patterson. Living in Dayton, Ohio, you must have a million stories. Yeah, fellas, I do. Let's do a book. And so we agreed to do a book, and don't you know, Carl Day passes away. So we dedicated the book, Inside the Real Area 51, to Carl Day and J. Allen Hynek, and the plaster cast that John Musgrove, the dental tech, made and stored in his vault for 30 years and gave to Carl Day is now on display at the Roswell UFO Museum down in Roswell, New Mexico.
Oh, wow. How cool.
Yes.
And speaking of Dr. Hynek, again, he played a role in the Air Force cover-up of information and public deception, is what I've read. Is there one piece of information that you have not talked about, or that we don't already know about?
Oh, yes. Don Schmidt was a student of J. Allen Hynek's. Mm-hmm. And he was trained at the knee of J. Allen Hynek, and knew him personally. And there are several chapters about Hynek's experiences with the Project Blue Book. And Hynek, as you know, was an astronomer at Ohio State University, and the Air Force grabbed him to be the scientific consultant to Blue Book, to give it some prestige and some
credibility.
Credibility, that's the word I'm looking for. Credibility, yes. And really, what he was doing, though, is they told him, now you're going to find if we can't find an explanation, a terrestrial explanation for it, you're going to find an astronomical explanation for these UFOs, meaning the planet Venus, the planet Jupiter, sundogs, bolides, you name it. You're going to be our scientific debunker. And so Hynek went along with this for a while, and he was starting to get perturbed, because he sensed correctly that the real good cases were not going to Project Blue Book. They were going elsewhere, and that was correct. And so he says, so what am I doing? I'm just explaining away lights in the sky. The real good cases are going somewhere else, and I want to know what's going on. I want to know what's at the bottom of this phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And the bottom line is they never told him. They never would tell him. And the sort of the highlight of Hynek's career was in 1965 and 66, they had this series of sightings in Michigan, Ann Arbor, Dexter, Michigan, and Hillsdale, Michigan. And the Air Force sent him up there to find out what was going on and hopefully to explain them away. Mm-hmm. Well, he had heard that some of the sightings had taken place in swampy areas. So he says, aha, I at least have a working hypothesis. So his plane lands and he goes down the gangway and he's met by a group of reporters. Dr. Hynek, tell us, what do you think? What's going on here? He says, well, fellas, I understand that some of the sightings have taken place in swampy areas. There's this phenomenon. It's called swamp gas. Mm-hmm. Swamp gas, and that's all. And off they go to report their stories. He didn't even finish his sentence, and the reporters are off. Hillsdale sightings, Ann Arbor sightings, swamp gas, says Air Force expert, and he says, "Oh my God, this is awful." Because he was just saying that as a possibility, and he never lived that down. He became known as Old Swampy, Mr. Swamp Gas. He never lived it down, and it gave him the impetus to actually switch sides. He became an advocate for the scientific study the real scientific study of UFOs, and not just what the Air Force had him doing. So that's what did it for him. Mm-hmm. And he never did get the answer from the Air Force. They always kept him in the dark. And we have a chapter called "They're Making Patsies of Us All Over Again." That was when they brought him back. As you know, Marla, the Air Force dropped the UFO investigation in 1969 after the University of Colorado study said there's nothing worth pursuing here. The Air Force dropped it. Well, they kept Hynek close by. They gave him some bogus title and some bogus study to undertake that he realized was really nothing, and that they were just keeping him close at hand so he didn't go out on his own proselytizing about how UFOs were real. And it didn't work, because he did publish a couple of books that there's really something going on there, and a number of articles too. But he was I don't know if you'd call him a dupe. He was maybe a dupe at first, but then he caught on real fast and said something's wrong here. Project Blue Book is just it's not the real deal. The good cases are going somewhere else.
I've got a really good last question from the chat room because our time is running out quickly. Sherry wants to know, what stops the government and military from stealing and or destroying existing alien evidence that has gone public now?
Say that again.
What stops the government and military from stealing or destroying existing evidence that has gone public now?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what existing evidence has gone public. We're still looking for physical evidence. We know that documents have been destroyed. The 1994 Government Accounting Office study found that all the documents relating to Roswell had been destroyed by authorities unknown. But I don't know of any physical evidence that's out there. When
I first read that, I kind of thought she was referring to all the evidence that they have, because they're never going to let it out. I don't know, maybe.
Well, I can't imagine that if you're talking about the evidence that they have stored away, maybe in the Blue Room, I can't imagine them destroying that. Number one, because it can't be destroyed. That was one of the things they found out, was they couldn't cut it or scratch it or burn it or deform it or destroy it in any way. So unless they bury it somewhere, but I can't imagine they would want to do that. They would want to try to exploit its technology.
Yeah.
I don't think they can. I don't think they're that stupid.
Right. And, it's good to keep, but it's just, it's like this little secret thing that will never be out for, as far as I can guess anyway. They're never going to admit that it ever existed or there was ever such a thing, but they'll just keep passing it from generation to generation, I guess.
Yes. They are keeping it with their fingers crossed that one doesn't land on the White House lawn or on Times Square or in Times Square, because then it's obvious they've been lying to us all these years. But
right.
You're right. They will never admit UFOs are real. They will never, ever admit that Roswell really happened. As far as it being UFOs being extraterrestrial and Roswell being extraterrestrial, they will never admit that.
Right. Well, the hour is gone, and I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's lots of food for thought here, and because we only had enough time to pick at bits and pieces of the new book, where can people find it to read all the details?
You can obtain a copy of Inside the Real Area 51, The Secret History of Wright-Patterson at your friendly local Barnes & Noble store. You can also get it online at www.amazon.com, and you can get not only the physical copy of the book at Amazon, you can also get the Kindle. You can get it in Kindle. You can get it ebook and whatever other electronic versions they have. You can get those all at Amazon. Great.
And what's your website so people can
Our website for Don Schmidt and myself is www.roswellinvestigator.com.
And it's a good site because I was nosing around there for a while yesterday. Lots of good stuff there.
Roswell. We're going back in 2 weeks back to Roswell. We're doing another archaeological dig to try to locate maybe some pieces that the government missed.
Well, good luck with that. And if you find anything really wonderful, call me up and let's get you back on to talk about it. How's that?
All right.
Okay. Well, thank you again for being here and sharing the new information and some food for thought, as I said before. And everybody, we are out of time. So until next time, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
This has been another edition of Stirring the Cauldron with Martha Brooks. Be sure to tune in next week at the same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2013. Moonlight Haw by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.